Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Modern Disaster Recovery Workshop webinar. We've got a great presentation put together for you today, and we're excited to get started. A few housekeeping items to cover before we get into the meat of the slides. Today's webinar will run about 45 minutes, plus have a question and answer session. Feel free to submit any questions or comments you have through the chat or Q&A panel tools with the WebEx. We're going to try to get through the bulk of the slides first and get to the questions at the end. But please send your questions as you have them, and we'll fit them in as we're able to do so throughout the presentation. Ann Dunning with Sales will be chatting with you throughout the presentation, so feel free to direct your questions to her or any clarifying questions you might have about the information. Please feel free to use the Q&A panels and the chat functions for that. If you're tweeting about the webinar, we encourage you to use the hashtag BLRaaS or other Twitter handles that are posted on this slide here. We are recording a copy of the presentation, and you'll get that as well as a copy of the slides in the next few business days. Today's presenter is Bluelock Chief Technology Officer Pat O'Day, and with that, I'm going to hand it over to Pat to kick it off.
Great. Thanks, Anna. Hey, everybody. Hope you're having a good day so far, not too many fires that you're fighting in the field. We want to start a little bit broader before we narrow in on disaster recovery, because it's just really one of the largest challenges, or depending on if you're a glass half full or glass half empty person, it might be an opportunity facing you in your IT role. But these are some information we've gotten from Gartner, and this is certainly resonates or matches what we're seeing in the field as we work with a wide variety of companies, but really just getting a little bit more strategic about what you're going to do with cloud technology, where it fits, where it might not fit. Are you going to build it yourself? Are you going to purchase it from someone else or outsource it a little bit? Modernizing legacy applications. So obviously cloud can be fairly helpful, again, whether you deploy it yourself or you use a provider, but not all applications are necessarily ready to take advantage of things like elasticity and on-demand resources, and some aren't. A lot of applications still even aren't on an x86 or a virtual platform. So that's a big focus of IT, is if those things are holding you back, how do you modernize them in some way so you can be a little bit more agile? As you probably can appreciate, not only, the good news is IT is more valuable than ever from a talent perspective, but in a lot of cases you really need to deepen your bench strength, maybe find new talent, new skill sets that you don't have. I know a lot of people are hiring experts in automation, things like Puppet and Chef, to try and get more efficient, but those are tough skills to acquire. They're also tough to find people that are in your community or available to your company that have those skills already that aren't being sought for by everybody else. We've got a couple large employers here in town, very technology-centric companies, and I feel like we're competing with them every time we post a position on our website. And then the good old data center, yours might have been built in the 90s, maybe around the turn of the century, maybe even in the 70s or the 80s, but obviously there's a lot of upkeep and maintenance going on there, and a lot of modernization. A lot of people are sort of nearing the depreciation life cycle of the bigger equipment that's out there, whether that's an air conditioner, a generator, your SANs, things like that. And do you really want to be investing in those things, or do you really want to invest those resources more in driving business initiatives ahead, through the use of technology and funding things like new applications and mobile, et cetera? And then because of the data center, IT and the applications that you're running for your business are more important than ever, and probably even more integrated into day-to-day, minute-by-minute operations of your company. How do you protect them from data loss or application downtime in a way that's really resilient and responds to the even more critical nature those applications have in your business? And obviously that's what we're going to focus on mainly today. Before we jump into the workshop portion of the session, we also wanted to acknowledge the fact that you've got a lot of choices on how you're going to do this. And these are the three things that we see most companies either historically comfortable with or considering as alternatives as they move in the future. And it's really not obvious what's the right answer, because there are so many different strengths and challenges with each approach. You look at do-it-yourself. Nice thing is you got total control over the solution. You got a nice long-term Total cost of ownership can be pretty effective. And there aren't any really any limits because it's your design. You can build whatever you want. You are probably financially limited to some degree, but in terms of the architecture, if you have a preference for Cisco, Juniper, Cisco, that's really up to your organization. Challenges are, you know, you may not be a technology company. You may be just providing technology to a traditional business. And so things like prioritization, change control process, some of the things that dedicated technology companies, whether it's Google or eBay or even a cloud provider, take for granted today might be challenges in your world today. Managed hosting, pretty traditional. You buy some colo somewhere, you put some equipment over there. And the good news is you're kind of offloading certain things like maintenance of the facility and whatnot. There might be a few services that you can buy, whether it's backups or something, and you don't have to provide those. But, you know, it's really just sort of a partial step into that world, and at the end of the day, you still own and manage all those resources, or a lot of those resources yourself. You're also at a what we call a stair-step capacity model, where it's not quite as agile as cloud or as elastic as cloud. And then I'm sure all of you read an article probably every day, if not every other day, about all the mega clouds that are out there that people say you should be immediately, you know, thinking about putting all your applications there. And there's some really cool things out there. Capacity is unlimited. You can start immediately with a credit card. That kind of stuff is neat. But it's also pretty complex compared to a traditional environment. You know, finding out where your data is. There's actually a movie coming out now about a couple that loses some data in the cloud and they can't figure out where it is. So those kind of issues for an enterprise, if you've got security requirements, become problematic. Or the actual things that we're running into in the real world. So that's all sort of what I would almost call marketecture, and we're going to start dialing in some real grit here and hope that some of these things resonate with you. But when, you know, we've been working with companies for about 8 years now on disaster recovery, and these are the top 4 insights that we get when we talk to people. And I used to think it was sort of just me reading on CNN, but you know, based on the data and what customers are saying to us, or companies are saying to us, is that the risk and probably more important than the risk is the impact of data loss and downtime is very real, and it's growing. It's worse than it was before. Traditional methods, we'll talk a little bit more about this, are not effective anymore for modern business needs. So things where you used to be able to just, as long as you could restore something from tape or bring the data back, or maybe you have it backed up to a snapshot somewhere, you can restore that snapshot within an hour or so. That's great if nothing happens at the primary data center, but you know, what if you have a bigger issue? What if it's a virus? What if it's a fire? Something like that. Those methods aren't going to work. And you know, bringing something back in a few hours or a few days might have been good 5 years ago, but today, you know, that means a business impact. That means orders didn't get shipped, customers were dissatisfied, service wasn't rendered, or maybe even your brand was impacted. Those of us in IT, I've been in IT my entire career, and you know, it's still hard to explain the real risk to people. I mean, it's very hard to go to an executive and say that it's going to cost me $10,000 to fix this solution, but it'll protect us from $1 million worth of you know, loss or negative business impact. You know, do you have that dollars conversation? Is it a best practice conversation? Hey, everybody else is doing that. We're in the banking industry. There's a standard out there. We're required to do this for compliance. I mean, how exactly do you have that conversation? So we're going to try and help you with that. And then how do you prioritize DR? We've heard this phrase come up a lot more often. It's keeping the lights on. And that's all the stuff you were doing before disaster recovery came to the table. So what we see is disaster recovery kind of pokes its head up a little while. It might be 1 or 2 in priority if there's something happened to a company down the street from you, or if maybe there was an incident or a growing concern inside your business. We saw a lot of that come out of the East Coast after Hurricane Sandy. But you know, once everything's sort of recovered, the conversation dies down a little bit, and DR goes back to, you know, something you'll get to next quarter. Maybe you'll get it funded next year. So that's pretty tough. So disasters on the rise themselves, I thought this was just me reading the front page of CNN and you know, thinking that the media had sort of a negative take on what was going on in the world. But we did some research and actually found some data from FEMA. And FEMA wasn't around for 50 years, but this is basically any government qualified disaster that had occurred where they had to relinquish funds to help a region or a state or a city or a company. And you can see that in 50, 60 years, the number of those that have occurred have gone from under 10 to kind of a peak in 2010 of 250. That's a pretty massive increase. My personal takeaway is there are two things driving this. You could argue that maybe the weather patterns are changing. I don't know much about that, but I do know that even in my community that there are cities, towns, and businesses in places where there were forests, cornfields, and basically nothing 5, if not 15 years ago. So that tornado that would touch down, that water that would rise up in the river, the high wind that would go through, that used to not affect much other than the nature that was there, maybe some crops, but now it will impact, neighborhoods and businesses. And inside those businesses, neighborhoods, and other things that are built out there now, there's technology, right? So there might be a closet, there might be a whole data center, there might be a mission-critical application running there for a hospital or a bank or even an e-commerce company. And again, out where that field used to be, now there is technology that would be affected by that issue. So if we try to put a little bit of color into this, this will also help you understand some of our decision making in terms of where we put our data centers. And I don't know if I've got your cities captured here. I tried to take a shot at this and kind of get a fairly good representation around different parts of the country, but kind of from a central U.S., Midwest-centric point of view here, you've got, floods, hail, and high wind events, aka tornadoes, are the biggest issues. And then, when it's not coming down in the warm weather as water, it's coming down in the cold weather as ice or snow and freezing up condensers on the roof of our data centers. So water and wind are pretty dangerous in the central U.S. They're dangerous out on the coasts as well. They take it a new form because they start to come in more in the form of hurricanes and tsunami type effects, or just rising ocean water. You go a little further down south there, you've got surprised the number of hailstorms that were in Dallas. They get a pretty interestingly similar mix to some of the Midwestern cities in terms of tornadoes as well. But then they've got a drought phenomena, which, if you've got water-based cooling, that can be a real problem, is how do you ensure not only a water supply, but a clean water supply through a drought process, and dust storms, clogging up things. You go up to the northwest and you've got, really interesting stuff like earthquakes and volcanoes start to show up. I had no idea Portland had 10 volcanoes within, I'm not sure how many miles it was like 100 miles of the city, but pretty close. So, one thing you can do is do what Bluelock did, and that is put your data centers in places where those things don't happen. So in Indy, there are no volcanoes or earthquakes going on here, no big tropical storms. We've got a couple water issues that go on, high wind, and if you're concerned about those because those affect you as well, you can certainly go out to put a data center in Vegas like we did, and you're immune from those type of things for the most part. So that's all well and good, but statistically, that's only 9% of what's actually like to happen. And I didn't really looked at this slide this way, but I just realized that that's not only all the weather events, but that also includes all the other acts of God that might occur. So it's actually even probably less than 9% are all the weather-related issues that are out there. But the big ones are communication failure, your internet going down, mechanical failures, updates, but the big ones, human error, 47%. And a lot of people look at this slide and they assume that's, people on their team, whether it's a developer or an administrator making a mistake. That also includes malicious humans that are on the outside of your firewall. So if you have an application taken down due to a virus or some kind of attack, denial of service, or someone injects some code into your website, things like that. So how effective is DR today? It's pretty darn ineffective. I'm guessing that you guys already know that. You may not have the statistics we do, but you probably had a feeling this was the case. So 60% of companies don't have a full DR plan, and of those that do, 40% of them that have tried to execute it for one reason or another, it didn't work at all. It's probably because of these things over here. So 23% of the companies that have a plan don't test it on a regular basis, and even the ones that do, of those 65%, the test doesn't work. So if your test doesn't work, the odds that your full-on disaster recovery plan is going to work is probably pretty low. So that's the end of the scare you to death news that we're going to go through. Now we're going to try and climb our way out of that really dark pit that we built around you and help you out of here. So one of the things I mentioned before is that traditional approaches are ineffective. This would actually explain why those statistics are pretty low. So we're going to talk about 4 things that we encounter on a pretty regular basis that companies are doing today. One is the cold site approach, usually running some form of take backup. You got your primary location here, a variety of applications there. Compared to what I would call modern requirements, even data backed up every 24 hours would be considered by the business to be infrequent, given that you could lose an entire day's worth of data if that tape got destroyed or that application went down and you had to recover from tape. Companies still use a cold site model, maybe from a company like SunGuard, where there are resources there that you're contracted for. It could be, an office location that you've made an arrangement with another business to use in case something went wrong, things like that. But the recovery experience, not only are you going to suffer from data loss, but the recovery experience is pretty poor because you do have to get on the phone with your VAR or your, your rep from PC Connection or Dell or whoever you buy your equipment from and have equipment shipped in. So there's almost an automatic baked-in 2 to 3 day process there just to get gear on site. And then even if you did get that equipment on site, that same application that might have taken 3 months, might have taken 6 months, a whole team of consultants and IT's entire focus to bring up and running the first time, you somehow have to get that application running again and assemble all the equipment and do all the testing under extreme duress with a lot of people looking over your shoulder. So that usually doesn't work out fairly well. A lot of you have evolved out of that into what we call a frugal warm site. And this gives you a bit better recovery and still a pretty reasonable cost for some form of DR. And again, you got your primary location there. It's where the majority of your financial assets are invested in. And then you might have a recovery location. This could be a second building that you might own somewhere else in the local area. It could be a co-location facility. We see local colos being used a lot for this. You've got a cabinet there. You put a little bit of equipment in, maybe just a SAN, and then you'll put some kind of replication technology in. You can protect some or part of your data there. Challenges, obviously, one of the cost-saving techniques here is you're not putting a full replica of your production infrastructure out at the recovery site. That's part of how you're going to save some money. That means that when you do that recovery, there's not enough performance capacity out there to bring all the resources back online and support all the users you had. So if you had 500 users or maybe 5 or 50,000 users running in your primary application, when you recover back over here, if you've only got a tenth of that infrastructure ready to go. Some people don't even have compute out there, what I've been told. That's not going to bring up any of users. If you do, you might get 20 or 30 users online. Good enough to test. I actually had one company tell me that their plan was to pick the top 2 customers of the 500 customers they have and bring them up first. And I thought, okay, that seems rational if you're dealing with a limited set of resources, but boy, if I was one of your other 498 customers, you better hope that I never heard you describe that to me. So anyway, how do you fix that? You got to order more resources and bring them in, which really just adds time and complexity. People who've been through a recovery or a test experience and realized how ineffective that can be will typically move to something in the form of a hot site. They'll get 2 buildings. This could be 2 buildings in the same campus. We see a lot of universities do this, a lot of large corporations that have larger campus in one city will do this. It might be where you have your headquarters is downtown and you have a colo in the suburbs, but either way, put in some kind of dark fiber connection between the two buildings. And the challenge here is that for certain events, both buildings may be disrupted. So, you know, you have a high wind event like some of the things we talked about, or power disruption. I've seen a company that had two buildings, I don't know, they were probably a couple hundred yards from each other, but they both shared the same network connection to the internet. So when it went down during a disaster, nobody could get to any of the applications from the outside, but you know, they had two pristine copies of that application up and running. Nobody could use it though. The other scenario that we see is more the geographically separate the hot site, and the challenge with that is that it's just a lot more expensive because you're adding a lot of technology. You're also suffering from you know, really high operating costs to run at that level, and there are probably other things that your company would rather you use your capital equipment, your operating budget, and your talent for than maintaining a really elegant DR solution. Depends on the company, right? There are companies where that is the mission, so that's what they do. Most companies don't resemble that, though. So how do we take all that stuff and try to communicate with other people? So this is the workshop portion of the class. Normally, when we do this, we actually do this at a live event where we will go out in the field. I think we've done about 30 of these this year. We work with IT folk and some of their leadership, and we do this interactively. So this is the first time we've actually tried to do this through a webinar format, so hopefully it'll work out pretty well. Obviously, some of the tools, in particular the cards that we use, as you see here, you don't have those with you. We're happy to send those to you. Just let Ann know that you'd be interested in that in the chat function. But we're going to walk you through a couple simulation exercises that we use to do at these events. So how do you simulate a disaster on a budget, I would say? Because certainly if I worked in Hollywood, that might be interesting and easier, and we've obviously seen movies like the new Transformers movie where they're pretty good at really ripping entire cities apart on film. But that wasn't within the scope of what we were trying to pull up here, so we took a little bit more practical approach to it. And the other thing that's interesting is that it's very dynamic. So there are somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 event cards that you can choose from. Each event is meant to represent a potential disaster that your company could run into. We also have an impact card because we know that a lot of businesses are different. So if you're a bank, if you're a hospital, if you're a software company, if you're a manufacturing company, the impact of disaster or IT downtime on your business is probably different from you know, the guy down the road. And downtime, you know, there are little events, might be able to be resolved in a day, and then there are some events that might take a week to take care of. So we've got a little bit of a variety there. Also, you know, when you're simulating a disaster, what data center do you use? So everybody kind of tries to buy the same things and build the same things out when they build the data center, but there's also pretty wide level of variety in the data centers that we run into when we talk to customers. So anyway, you've got a group of assets that you can use to try and manage disasters. And then, as you probably tell from my name, I'm Irish, so I subscribe to Murphy's Law. If you've ever had prior military service, you might know that the common phrase there is, all plans are good until the first shot is fired. Probably heard best laid plans of mice and men. There are a lot of ways to think about essentially when reality hits. Anyway, so we have some challenges that come up when you simulate the disaster, and these are things that are kind of unpredictable but very real based on talking to people. So we're going to go ahead and simulate what I'll call a physical event. So the event card that I've drawn here is called burnout. There was a fire in the data center. As if that wasn't bad enough, you have a water-based fire suppression system, sprinklers deploy and start to get your equipment wet. And in this particular case, the impact is very personal. It's called linked out, which means As soon as your leadership hears about what occurred, they basically say, hey, if you don't have this resolved within 24 hours, you should probably go ahead and update your LinkedIn profile. And I'm pretty sure it's not changing your status from single to, is it married? What's the, yeah, okay. So something fun like that. Obviously, because of the severity of the event, the downtime is pretty high, 5. For a fire in your data center, that 5 days might even be highly optimistic, but we'll give you the benefit of the doubt there. And, you know, the good news is not only was it a physical event, but you actually spent most of your budget putting in physical assets to try and protect yourself. So 2 things that you installed last year, you actually finally got that generator you've always been wanting, and unfortunately it wasn't a power event, it was a fire and a water event, so the generator won't help. If it had been a power outage, that would have been awesome. The other thing you did is you realized you were running a lot of really important applications in your environment, and you had some network outages, so you went ahead and upgraded to Sonnet Ring or redundant Ethernet or something that made your network redundant. But again, unfortunately, those capital investments you made and operating investments aren't going to help you when your sprinklers get turned on. So you do have a DR plan. Unfortunately, when you try to put it in place, it hasn't been tested in a long time because it's really hard to do. You know, normally you do that once a year. You might have done it 11 months ago. You might have even skipped the year because you were so busy deploying higher priority projects for your company. And you think, well, oh man, well, I can just call some vendors in to do this. Unfortunately, the event happened on a Friday night, so you're on the phone Saturday, you're trying to call your VARs and get equipment, you're trying to call that, you know, friendly company down the street that offered you some space down there you could use if this ever happened, and you can't find anybody to let you in the building. So it's kind of a pretty downer situation, but this is a classic model. So the contrast to that is to a physical event, if we sort of play the game again, is more of a logical event. So you have something go on where it's not a physical issue, but you have an internet outage of some kind. So the firmware on your router due to an upgrade, or maybe the network administrator makes a configuration change and knocks your internet connection down. It could have been your communications provider if you've not got a fairly reliable one, if you maybe made a decision based on cost to try and save some money there that might have caught up with you. So anyway, some really important applications, particularly your customer-facing application that represents your brand, is now down as a result of the internet issue. And because your company is perceived for reliable service and security, as Bluelock is, this is a good example for what this impact would be on us if our applications weren't available to the outside world. You're going to spend, you know, hundreds of thousands, if not $1 million, restoring your company image. And there have been a lot of high-profile cases over the last year where this has happened to companies, and they're spending way more than $1 million a day to restore their image. So because it is internet, you know, you get on the phone, you go to Tier 3 support, whatnot, and they're rolling trucks out to your location. You're going to only be down for 2 days. They tell you 1, and then they really just can't quite get it resolved, so it's going to roll into the 2nd day. And what's really cool is you actually have a second location where your applications are replicated over there or backed up, or something you can use. We don't really know what that means yet. And you're awesome. So you're actually a pretty talented IT person, or you've got some talented folks on your team, maybe both. But you can actually, you know, be pretty aggressive at getting kind of scrappy and try and bring everything back online faster than 2 days, because you can use the second site. Challenge is, as we described in the scenario before, you did go through a budget crunch. That probably explains why you're not on an awesome internet provider right now. But also the equipment that you have available at that backup site, despite how talented you are and how, you know, you're willing to put in 25 hours in a 24-hour day to try and bring this up and everything back, you really just don't have the assets over at that backup site that you need. And the assets that you have out there, it happens to be the equipment that you upgraded out of your production data center 3 years ago. And you thought instead of throwing it away or giving it back to one of the hardware resale companies, we'll just call it a DR site, move it over there. So you really, actually, the situation gets much worse because you're not really even able to use your talent to make that second site work. So what are companies doing to handle these types of things? There's a pretty wide variety. I'm actually going to skip ahead here. This is a tool that we use to help companies prioritize not only their applications but the particular needs of their business. So, the DR simulation card game is useful if you're trying to create a conversation and help your peers or help your business leadership understand that, yes, we do have a generator, yes, we have redundant Ethernet, and we have backups. That's really not going to get us back as quickly as I think you want me to be able to do. But this worksheet is another way to do that. So what we find is most companies can classify their applications and the availability that they need or the amount of downtime they can tolerate into either minutes, hours, or days. And so we use this worksheet, or people use this worksheet on our behalf. They put this in front of their business counterpart and say, what are the mission critical applications for our company? What has to be back in minutes? What would the impact be if application X, Y, or Z was down for days and not minutes? And then, okay, so I think we've all heard of those applications, but what are some of the less famous applications in our business that are still pretty darn important? Maybe only a certain business units. What are those? Because I know those business units would tell me they expect those apps to be, they love them to be back in minutes. They probably can't afford to pay for that, so can they be back in hours? And that would be perfectly fine as long as it's not multiple days. And then maybe you've got some other applications like payroll, as long as it wasn't down on a Friday and it came back before Friday, that might be okay. Things like all the PowerPoints you've got loaded up on your F drive, those might be able to be down for a couple days because everybody's got them on their laptop or in Dropbox or whatever, so no big deal. So I'm going to walk through a couple companies that are actually doing things at these different tiers. So I'll skip back here. So F5 Networks is actually, we're proud to be hosting F5.com and F5 Dev Central. And if you're familiar with F5 Networks, it's almost a $2 billion company. They, uptime and application availability is everything they do. It's what their products do. It's what their company is all about, whether it's security or redundancy or load balancing, all those different types of things, optimization, performance. But it's really about making sure our applications are just awesome when they're served up in front of or behind F5 technology. So of course, their own applications that they serve to their customers had to work the same way. So what they did is they actually did a more modern hot site. So they have virtual data centers based on VMware running in both the Bluelock Las Vegas data center and another one running in our data center in Indy. So if anything happened to either location, the users would be redirected to the other site automatically using all the magic F5 technology that they have in the real world. And what that allows them to achieve is basically a zero, or recovery time measured in seconds if not minutes. So again, they put those applications here at the top of the pyramid. So we've got some other companies too. We'll go through a scenario here real quick. I'm trying to get these kind of in an order that the event that we do or the scenario we do with the simulator sort of matches up with the customer story that we want to tell you, but I don't have it completely nailed yet. So other things to worry about. So we talked about a physical event, we talked about a logical event. Those are all things that in theory are to some degree in your control. Malicious events, not so much. You can do the best you can try to close the back doors, patch your software, but for me, security events or malicious events are more of a if, not or a when than an if. So in the simulator, we've got a card called Parting Shot, which means former IT staff member zaps a critical application by coming through a back door. Unfortunately, the application they hit, they knew exactly what they were doing. They logged in and they ran some sort of weird SQL query in our e-commerce ordering system, which has completely jacked up our data and all of our web and application servers. That's not cool. So there's $100,000 in lost revenue for customer orders, not to mention really angry customers that we need to take care of. And it's so bad it's going to last for 3 days by the time the DBAs and the developers and the sysadmins can kind of put everything back together. The good news is that two of the things that we had are we have a vendor, Quickie Mart mentality, where they're open 24 hours. So whether it was on a Friday night at 3 in the morning, Saturday afternoon at 1 p.m., or Wednesday at lunchtime, our vendors are there. And we've also subscribed to a fairly new service called Recovery as a Service, and it's fits into that crop of all the as-a-service models that are out there. But what it is, at the end of the day, is really just using all the things that cloud is best at: the elasticity, the always-on, the availability, only paying for what you use, and applying that to a disaster recovery model. So we've got that in our favor. Unfortunately, when we go to try and use our recovery as a solution, the situation turns out to be much worse than anyone thought. It sounds like this former IT person was actually in the environment a lot longer than we knew. So not only is the production environment messed up, so are all the backups. And he timed it right, and when our key staff member that we needed to recover the environment happened to be on vacation in Cabo. So we're missing our most important person, and this person was a lot more malicious than we even knew when we first started investigating the incident. Normally, what we see is that's the value of a cloud provider can really come in and help mitigate both of those two issues. So in Bluelock in particular, we can actually do the disaster declaration on your behalf. Not necessarily that you would be in Cabo and on vacation, but it could be that whatever the event was is impacting you and your family as well. And there might be cell service that you can't get on the network with your laptop. You might not have your laptop. And oddly enough, that application that you're in charge of taking care of might not be the most important thing in your world at that time. So we're happy to help you do that. And then the other thing that we learned to do was when situations were much worse than someone thought, suddenly that DR environment has to behave like a production environment. So things that you don't account for in a disaster, like running backups every day, having a full security deployment, intrusion prevention sensors, maybe getting the VPNs up to all your remote sites. Those are things people either think, I'm only going to be in the environment for a day or two, that's not going to matter, and it's in the middle of a disaster, we're lucky to have an application at all. But if it goes from 1 to 2 days to maybe 3 or 4 weeks because the event is much worse, you need that environment to behave as much like production as possible. So we've used our software to actually make all that happen. We can actually upgrade you from a DR environment to a production environment with a handful of mouse clicks. So one company that we serve, we have the fortune to serve as well, is Goodwill of Indiana. And they found themselves in the, I would say it's close to the e-commerce business. They're a very traditional IT organization in terms of, they operated their own data center. They had a lot of classic, Microsoft and other common applications they were running in their environment. And they're also very innovative. So they came up with this idea to create a rewards card application, and that application is actually available 24/7. All the customers that Goodwill has in this area have a rewards card, and they can use that card to either get discounts or credits applied toward, if you're a lower income person, you can apply that shopping in the store and actually save money with the card. Or if you're someone that drops off or donates goods to Goodwill, they'll actually track all that for you and send you a report that you can use at the end of the year for your taxes. And that's something I do. I get those little slips of paper every time I go, but I always lose track of them by the end of the year, and then I don't end up being able to put it on my tax form, so they've taken care of that as well. But what that did is it put them into essentially the same requirements that an eBay would have, because the business expected and the customers expected that application to be up and running 24/7, and that wasn't like the majority of the other applications that they have. So they actually are now replicating that application to a Bluelock RaaS environment in our Las Vegas facility. So in case anything would happen here in Indiana, whether it was a security issue with the software or data corruption or, heaven forbid, something physical occurred, they can keep that application going at another location. So the final simulator event we're going to run through is more of a human event, and as we saw, that is the majority of what goes on there. So in this case, the event card we pulled up is a software update to a mission-critical application went wrong. Someone tried to automate something, the script got a little mangled, and they ended up, I think I saw one really big issue that happened where somebody had a table row that was one over from where it was supposed to be, and they wrote the first names over the social security numbers, something like that. Anyway, it broke the whole application. Something like that has occurred. The impact, obviously your application's down, and if you think about a more of a transactional application like online pizza ordering, if I need to feed the soccer team on a Wednesday night and papajohns.com is not open, I'm probably going to go over to Domino's and get the pizza from there because I just have to get the job done. And two things have happened there. One is that's revenue that went to a competitor, but two, what if I actually liked the competitor's experience? I may not ever come back to your company. So it's pretty important that we bring that application back online. The devs are saying, hey, we can restore the database, so we think it's only going to be down for the day, maybe even less than a full day. And the good news is we have the data backed up, so we can actually have what we think is a solid copy of the data to restore the database back prior to the update. And we also have some test equipment because our CEO is IT friendly, so we've got a pretty good budget environment. We've got some extra gear laying around that we can test it on. That way, a lot of people, they go to try to restore the application and it actually gets worse because other changes have occurred and whatnot. So we can actually do some testing before we try to do it for real. When we try to go do that, we realize that testing, we've only tried that once, and the world changed. So a lot of the documentation, license keys, things like that we spent 2 weeks writing down and filing and storing and documenting. 6 months later, that stuff's changed, it's different. So it's actually going to increase our downtime because a lot of things we took for granted there are not going to work. And then the backup site is in the same town and was impacted by the same event. You say, well, how the heck could that happen? This is a software event. Well, a lot of replication technology, particularly SAN to SAN, the minute you have a garbage in, garbage out problem, the minute you make an update to production, it's immediately replicated over to your backup site. So we actually have two corrupt environments, both primary and backup, due to that software update. So that's a problem. So we talked a little bit about recovery as a service and using the cloud for disaster recovery. I'm just going to walk you through one scenario where we have a customer. It's exactly what Goodwill is doing and others, but it's a company called Tire Discounter, and they're headquartered in Cincinnati, Ohio. They're a retail organization. They've got over 100 retail stores throughout the country, and their biggest issue was that their point of sale and their logistics system that determines what their just-in-time inventory, how many tires and how many rims do we ship to what stores every day, all operate in that one data center. And they realized that if that data center had an impact and was down, that has a direct impact on the store operations. So they actually put in a private connection into a Bluelock environment. It's very economical because the only thing that they're paying for on a day-to-day basis is the bandwidth to replicate the data to us and some storage resources here. So if you have 10 terabytes of data here that you want to protect for your applications, you need to store a copy of that 10 terabytes of data over here. But because you're not paying for all the CPU and memory, and all that only comes in when through elasticity when you have a test or a declaration, it's extremely affordable. So if there is an event, all those resources are supplied on demand, and then after an hour or a day or a week when you're done using those resources, they go back and you stop paying for them. So how exactly does it work? So again, we talked about there being All these retail locations are out there. They're actually up to over 100 now. I need to update the slide. They've got their headquarters here. They're running all those production applications that I talked about. And under normal conditions, those retail stores are going right through an MPLS cloud to the headquarters office. Headquarters is replicating to the Bluelock site using a technology called continuous data replication, which means it makes a copy of every write that's created. So the minute a new piece of data changes here, it's immediately written. There's no snapshots, roll-up, quiesces, or backups that have to occur, so the data is super up to date. At Bluelock, if there's an event over there and that data center is unavailable, they can power up the environment at Bluelock. And what's really awesome is Failback. There was a reason that those applications run in production here and not somewhere else. So after the disaster, you probably want to get back to normal operation. All we do is reverse the CDP stream and send the data back, all the changes that got made while the production environment was down. Once that's restored through a controlled failover mechanism, something like 3 in the morning on a Saturday, we fail the applications back and the stores can come back up and running. And then once the headquarters location realizes it's in charge of production again, it's very simple. It starts replicating and reestablishes its DR protection. So that was a lot of technology behind the scenes there that I did in some more graphical slides, but we're talking more about the situation and the business impact here. We have a couple other presentations that we do. These are available on our webcast link down below, or you can find them on YouTube as well. But if you're looking at how to take this more from a strategic standpoint, we can help you with that. It's more of a consultative effort on our part, working with you to put a strategy in place that would protect you better. If you're sort of ready to dive into the trenches, we've got some architecture material you can go through, find different scenarios that might apply to how your specific data center network or applications are designed. And if funding is a challenge for you, we can talk about how to leverage your backup budget or other things that you might have and put together an effective cloud-based DR budget. Something new that we've done as well is we've realized that expertise and getting more comfortable with the technology is important. We launched a certification program earlier this year. We now, as of the end of this month, we'll have 100 RaaS certified engineers across the country. You're more than welcome to reach out to us as well and let us know if that would be of interest. Of course, we'd love for you to tell us how you did in the chat bar, and we have a couple more things for wrap up, and that's it.
Well, we're going to send a survey out to, if you have any feedback for us, we'd love to hear it. And then also, if you would like a card deck for your office, we've heard it's specifically helpful to help bring the business value of disaster recovery back to your team. Let us know that in the chat function or via the Q&A, and we're happy to mail those directly out to you. So we have a few minutes left for question and answer. And we've had a couple come in already. Please keep sending those through to Anne. Pat, one of the first questions we had, it's kind of an overarching. This person specifically worried about hosting a HIPAA-compliant workload in Bluelock. So can Bluelock handle that? And I don't know if you want to wrap in PCI and other types of compliance in as well to that answer.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, the one thing that most compliance standards have in common is that there's some responsibilities that the provider can take care of for you, and there are some responsibilities that the end client has to do. My favorite example is firewall. Obviously, as a cloud provider, we can provide firewalls as a managed service. You can run your own firewall technology here. We can make the changes for you. You can make the changes yourself. So lots of flexibility there. However, the only person who can dictate firewall policy and should be able to dictate firewall policy is the customer themselves. So we've actually got a great worksheet on that that sort of outlines the 2 or 3 things that the customer is still responsible for and always will be, and then the variety of things that Bluelock can offload. Because we do support HIPAA high-tech workloads, we have a number of those running here, as well as PCI and some of the financial markets like banks. So absolutely. And that applies to both production and DR.
This is jumping back over DR specific. How long can I stay running in recovery with Bluelock?
That's a good question as well. We have actually had, and this is, I would call it rare because it's happened more than once, but we have had customers go through a disastrous scenario actually end up running in Bluelock and then stay, and they are still here a year later. So I believe the answer is as long as you want. The biggest thing is making sure that we capture any specific requirements you might have that are different about your environment and ours, and make sure those are sort of folded in. And I guess a lot of it would depend on, did you accidentally get into our environment for production because of a disaster, and now you're thinking about maybe I should stay? Or is it more of an intentional kind of a migration? We're seeing a lot of people take up certain applications and decide that for that particular need, they don't want to be in the data center business anymore. They don't want to buy the new equipment and upgrade that thing, so they're going to go ahead and use the DR process as a migration, and then they end up staying in our environment. We've got lots of scenarios.
That tees up the next question perfectly. How does failover work, and what about failback?
Yeah, so there's a wonderfully neat presentation that we have that really gets into all the components. So I'll just try to offer, I'll call it the 30-60 second version of that. There is an agent that you install on your side in the hypervisor. So we'll use the example of vSphere. It runs as an agent on the vSphere host. When you install it, you actually get a new tab in Virtual Center that basically gives you a disaster recovery control panel. And in that disaster recovery control panel, you can pick the VMs that you want to protect, put them in what we call a protection group, which is like a folder. And as soon as those VMs are put in that folder, it'll say where do you want to replicate them to. You would pick one of our virtual data centers at one of our locations, whichever one's best for you. And then that replication agent that you installed will actually start to replicate that data out to our site. And as I mentioned in the tire discounter case, it uses a technology called continuous data protection, which means every time a write is written from the hypervisor memory space to the array on disk, that write, a copy of that write is also sent to the Bluelock environment. In terms of failback, all we're doing is reversing the streams. So in a failback scenario, let's say that you've had an event and you've had to fail one application or maybe your entire data center over to our environment. We literally go in and we do the same steps that you did to send the data to us. We say, hey, we want to go ahead and take this set of applications and replicate it back. We put your IP address and security information in. You would have to open up the VPN tunnel so that data could come back to you from us. The software is intelligent enough to understand that there's already some portion, if it wasn't a fire, if it was more of a network outage, and so your original VMs are intact and they've only changed by 2 to 3%, we will only send the 2 to 3% of the data that's changed since the failure back to you. If it was a catastrophic loss and you're dealing with brand new equipment, we will actually replicate the entire application or VMs back to you, which takes a little longer, but it's the same exact process. Awesome.
That is all the questions that we've had come through right now. So Pat, thank you for your time. We just got one more come through? Nope. If there are any more questions, feel free to talk to us directly. If they're more sensitive or descriptive, we're happy to answer those offline. So thank you very much for your time. As a reminder, we're going to send out the slides and the recording within a few business days. Thanks for attending today's webinar, and have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks.